Hello and welcome. Today we're going to be looking at a genre of gaming that I know I probably shouldn't like as much as I do. I know is ultimately shallow and doesn't have a great deal of any substance to it, but is something that I still love anyway. And that is the button masher, or the arcade waggler, or the trackball wiggler if you're really old. I don't think wiggler is a term, but I'm going with it. So with the 2016 Rio Olympics around the corner, thought I'd have a look at the games that came out for the Dreamcast that were button mashers or track and field games or athletics games. So there were 3 of them in total. We've got Sydney 2000, the official licensed game by Eidos. We have Virtua Athlete 2K by Sega Sports Hitsmaker. And then you have ESPN Track and Field by Konami, who some would say the original masters of track and field. So Sydney 2000 opens with a cinematic that shows famous Olympians. Jesse Owens is in there, Carl Lewis is in there, Linford Christie is in there, as well as a host of people that I kind of recognise but don't really know their names, but I'm sure they're important. This game was also out on a few other formats. I specifically remember playing this on the original PlayStation. Straight away, one of the things that I noticed about this game is it's got quite long load times, probably the worst of the 3. Luckily, you get this beautiful didgeridoo music to compensate, the sort of music that I imagine just plays everywhere in Australia. So once it loads, you're greeted with this the intro screen. You've got arcade mode, probably where you spend most time. You've also got Olympics that I'll talk about in a bit, head to head, as well as a coaching mode. Now, coaching mode I was interested in originally. However, it is not a strict coaching mode where it will tell you how to improve. It's literally just a practice over and over and over again of certain events or whatever event you choose.
This man is.
Of the 3 games, Sydney 2000 actually has the biggest choice of countries to be, although this is purely an aesthetics touch. Doesn't affect the gameplay, it just affects how your character looks. It's also got the most events to choose from with 12. You've got sort of 100 meters, hurdles, javelin, high jump, stuff you'd expect. Then you've got swimming, and you've got kayaking, and then you've got speed sprinting, which is a cycling velodrome event.
Inside. Next is Australia. Then the Republic of South Africa. Next along, Switzerland.
One thing I will give to this game's credit is the presentation style is very nice. It's very authentic. It's got a nice television style intro for most events, complete with a real commentator.
The USA on the inside.
So it introduces every event, adds some authenticity to it, makes it seem more like a television broadcast. And from what I've seen of YouTube videos for the other territories, they've got their own commentator who I'd imagine, similar to the UK one, is someone that you'd associate with being on the actual broadcast of the athletics or the Olympics.
Player 1 is first. He's left the competition behind with a dip on the line. What a showman.
Despite the official license, I actually find that Sydney 2000 is probably the worst of the 3 games to play. The graphics on the Dreamcast version are near identical to what I remember playing on the PlayStation 1 version at the time. And as I mentioned before, so are the load times. The weightlifting in particular, as you can see, looks really bad. He looks like a kind of Shrek rejected character. The models for the sprinters and the track events aren't really much better neither.
Player 1 takes first place.
So the whole game, mechanically, it feels really clunky to play and it lacks fluidness. The 110 meter hurdles you just saw there, it feels horrendous to play. Even when you're timing your jumps, it doesn't really feel like it has any effect over how you're doing. So the whole game just feels really sluggish. It's a really bad combination for a button masher, because the basic premise of the genre means that any type of input lag is quite literally game breaking. Too many of the events seem to suffer from this. High jump, for example, as you can see playing in front of you, is really hard to play. The game doesn't give you any clue as to what you might be doing wrong or where your timing might be off. As you can see, I had that extended speed video before I managed to really figure out what I was doing. It took me an absolute age to nail down what I think is the fundamentals of how to do the high jump. But even though I've done that, I wouldn't be confident of being able to pull off a decent jump if I went back to the game, because there's just no real refinement to how it plays. There's no set way of being able to describe how you do that event.
Very close to the bar there.
Compared to successful popular button mashers, I feel like it lacks signposting. So what I mean by that is the way the game guides you for when you're doing well or you're doing poorly. It doesn't explain if you're too early or too slow. And like I said before, coaching mode doesn't do anything to actually help you improve other than letting you repeat it over and over and over again.
Oh, that's so embarrassing. You hardly ever see that.
What also doesn't seem to help the game is there's a real lack of speed to it. Even when you're doing well, it doesn't ever really feel enjoyable.
For this event, player 1 is team 1. And the other team is India.
So the game's got a couple of unique events, unique sports that I personally hadn't seen in any other button mashers. One of them though is sprint cycling, and again it doesn't really come off. It's trying to combine the idea of pressing the buttons as fast as you can, combined with a stamina gauge. So if you go too fast, that will deplete and your cyclist will slow down. But again, it's got a real lack of speed.
They could leave themselves too much to do. A1 kayak competition is about to get underway. Well, and next up for us here is player 1.
Now, this was an event that I did like though, kayaking. So it's one of the few times where the controls really seem to work. It's actually a nice change of pace. So it's one button for forward paddling, one button for reverse, and you have to go through the green gates forward, you have to go through the red gates in reverse. It seems to be one of the times though when the sluggish input isn't really there or doesn't affect you, so you don't feel like you're being cheated by the poor mechanics of the game. Right, and right at this very start of the feature I mentioned the Olympic mode. So what this effectively is you start right at the very bottom of the rung of your particular sport. You have to do some training, you have to do some qualification, you have to do some national events to make it into the Olympics. Originally this sounds like something I'd be really in favour of, but it really comes across as soulless and very unfun. The training modes are all different, to the game's credit, for different events. So you've got speed and power to build up if you want to do sprinting. You've got accuracy to improve if you want to do the trap shooting. If you're watching this and imagining that it looks like a really unfun game from Point Blank, the excellent light gun shooter, then you're probably about right.
Well, we have for you now the stage.
So with the training done, you're then thrown into the first qualifying race. Tries to put a slightly different spin on it, but it's still done in the same stadium, and it's, as I've mentioned before, it's hamstringing you. So I'm still doing the button pressing like I normally would to be under 10 seconds in the main game, but for here it takes over 14. If you add into that the fact that it's just really unfun to do the training events, you can see why I didn't want to invest any more time into this mode, even though it was something that originally intrigued me. Very surprising this game actually won a BAFTA for Sports Game of the Year, and I'm not entirely sure who was reviewing it or what other sports games came out that year. Next up, we've got ESPN International Track and Field by Konami. As I mentioned at the very start, this was also out on PS2. Most places list them as an identical game, but there are some very, very minor differences. Compared to Sydney, it's got one less event. You do have to unlock a couple of them though in trial mode. Championship is your arcade mode where you play through the events. One thing I like about this compared to Sydney, the character models are really chunky. They actually look like athletes, they actually look like people that would be strong or that would be doing their respective events. Each event starts with this kind of cross between the Matrix and the Liquid Terminator, giving you a really quick overview of the event and what's needed, what buttons are needed, what you're going to be expected to do.
Ladies and gentlemen, we'll now begin the men's 100-meter dash.
On your mark.
So the events in this feel like they're much more mechanically strong. There's a quickness and a fluidness to them that you don't get with Sydney. It's much easier to see whether you've gone wrong because the HUD's cleaner, the on-screen visuals make it clearer whether you're too fast or too slow. As you can see with pole vault, high jump's the same, long jump the same. There's like a timing element where you've got to do a kind of skill stop to make your athlete perform the move, and when you mess up, you know why you've messed up. Clear from that throw that it's just outside the Pac-Man style HUD display. I know that that's not going to stay in the bounds, whereas with the next attempt I know if I stop it bang in the middle I'm going to have a clean throw.
The distance of the second attempt was 105.17 meters.
So now we actually have some side-by-side comparisons of the Dreamcast on the left and the PlayStation 2 version on the right. I feel like other than the facial models of the contestants, the athletes, there's not really a great deal of difference between the two. The HUDs have got very, very minor visual differences, and that is about it.
The first attempt has ended in a foul.
Second attempt. Set.
Skeet shooting is in both. It looks near identical again, barring some HUD changes. What is slightly different though is there's a very, very minor rule change between the two. So in the Dreamcast version you start by shooting at 2 clay pigeons. If you hit both you then shoot at 3 in the next one. If you hit all 3 you then shoot at 4 in the next one. But if you miss one you'll reset back to 2, which makes it very difficult. In the PlayStation 2 version though, if you hit 2 and then you move on to 3 and you hit 3 you move on to 4. If you miss one of those targets you only go back 1 stage. So you'll go back from 3 to 2 or you'll go back from 5 to 4, which actually makes it easier to win at the PlayStation version.
Ladies and gentlemen, we'll now begin the weightlifting clean and jerk.
Another event that shows the comparison between the two is weightlifting, which is on both of them. Again, virtually identical, bar one or two HUD changes. And the buttons that you have to use, you use right trigger on the Dreamcast, you use L1 on the PlayStation 2. And as again you can see, it's pretty much the faces are the only real difference in quality there. One of the reasons why I did want to talk about weightlifting though is because I've been very positive about ESPN overall, and I don't think it'd be fair to talk about the game without mentioning how annoying weightlifting is as an event. I generally think it'd be easier to lift some of these weights in real life than it is on the game. You have to do this real kind of arduous build up the power for stage 1, build up the power again for stage 2, and then repeat that a third time and keep that held in the power area. Whilst not popular with everyone, gymnastics in this version is the change of pace game the way that kayaking was for Sydney. So you build up your speed to get to the vault. How quick you are going affects how difficult the vault's going to be to do, and then you have a nice Shenmue style quick time input event, and how accurate you are on that affects your score.
Put in place this time.
So the Dreamcast version and the PlayStation 2 version each have an event that is just unique to their console. So the Dreamcast has Vault that we've just seen, and then Triple Jump, which is playing in front of you, and the PlayStation 2 version has 100-meter freestyle swimming. So I'm not sure why they specifically only have either swimming or the 2 events for the Dreamcast, but they do. Overall, I just find ESPN International Track and Field a much superior button masher to Sydney 2000. One thing that I just couldn't believe wasn't included in Sydney was the idea of records or some way of tracking your best attempt at every event. It has personal bests there, but there's no way of viewing which each one is or getting a reminder of that prior to starting. For me, a game like this is meant to be multiplayer, and the records are a very, very important part of that. And not having them just seems like a crazy omission. And last up, we have got Virtua Athlete 2K by Sega Sports. It opens, like I mentioned before, this seems to be very, very similar to Apple's revolutionary iPod advert, even though obviously this came out long before that did. Not that I'm implying anything. Now personally, I'd never even heard of this. First off, I think it looks fantastic. Nice big chunky character models. Again, it opens with a buttons tutorial for every event. I think it's a very good looking title. I think it sounds very good. It sounds very arcadey. It's odd that it doesn't seem to be very well received at all. IGN in particular gave it 4 out of 10, saying there should be an award for anyone still playing it after the first hour of having their very first go.
The tournament record has been broken. It's time
So straight away, first impressions of this was I was getting a feeling that I'd played it before. And that's because I have played it before, because the game is basically a throwback to Athlete Kings, the arcade and Sega Saturn game. Some of the events are virtually lifted from Athlete Kings or Decathlete, depending on what region you're in. So other than some HUD changes and the fact that it's dropped some of the cartoon styles, it's near identical. 100 meters, 110 meter hurdles. I've added a 4-stage stamina bar, but shot put, javelin, 1500 meters, which seems like a strange event to have in a game, they're all near enough as they were in Athlete Kings. In fact, the Sega DNA is right throughout this game. The menus are very Sega, the music is very Sega, and even where you select the country that your athlete is from and create athlete mode is very similar to how you'd pick a team in Virtual Striker, specifically the arcade version of that. Personally, I couldn't be further from IGN's opinion on this. I see it's got limitations, it's only got 7 events, and I think paying full price for it in 2000, I might not have been as big a fan of it as I am now. However, it had online leaderboards. I would have loved that at the time. The idea that it was doing this idea of competitive time attack style modes you'd get with a lot of PSN or Xbox Live games now, is one of the ways that shows how innovative Sega and the Dreamcast was as a company at the time. I couldn't help but feel that IGN review was probably wrote by someone on a Friday lunch who was rushing to meet deadlines, because the more I discovered about create your own athlete mode, the more I thought it was brilliant, and again is something that shows how far ahead of its time Sega were with some of their ideas. What I liked about the character creation is it seems to have been missed by a lot of places or sites that have discussed the game that I've found retrospectively or from the time. So it has you pick 3 different interests for your character. The IGN review in fact did criticise this as a pointless move, but it's not pointless. Whatever attributes you set for your character affects how they perform in certain events. You can also change the visual appearance of the character. There's not many faces, but there's a lot of outfits that make you look like you could be from Athlete Kings, and then the real beauty of it is the idea of saving your created character to your VMU. What I particularly loved about this is it then allows you to load your VMU character to use the ghost data for. So as you'll see playing out in front of you, I've just set a time with my character Big Moon Bunny. I've loaded him and I've loaded Mr. Junkyard, and in a second you'll see that I'm actually racing against their best times.
It's time to introduce the athletes. Please put the competing
For this event here, I'm actually playing as Seymour Miller, the Jamaican, and you'll notice that the two competitors I've loaded are in the race, and it's shown me what the best times they've ever got. It may look like I'm playing free player, but this is actually single player. This is me playing against save datas of other characters that I've created. Where this really comes into being a useful feature is, for example, this jump here happening is the save data of the best jump I've ever had with this character. I'm not actually playing that or controlling that. I was competing against them at this stage. So it showed me the power they got, it showed me the angle they got, and it allowed me to try and replicate that with my new created character. Granted, you might be watching this thinking, well, all you're doing is talking about a replay and how you're impressed by the idea of ghost data. But this is so far ahead of the official Sydney game, and I don't know any other games that have even gone as far as to include this. It's a bit like allowing you to play multiplayer against yourself, which, when you consider the competitive nature of this type of game, seems like an absolute no-brainer. Don't get me wrong, I do understand the limitations of this. Butting mashers or athletics games are limited as it is. To launch with only 7 events seems strange, especially given its strong connection to Athlete Kings and the fact that it's missing 400 meters, which that had. And also, why is it not called Athlete Kings for the Dreamcast, or got a closer spin on Athlete Kings or Decathlete? But for me, I can't believe I missed this game at the time.
Competition.
Ladies and gentlemen, we'll now begin.
Other than Sydney 2000, which I'm half tempted to relist back on eBay, I'd say that if you're into button mashers or you fancy giving one a go, you've got 2 really strong titles to choose from. Obviously, ESPN Track and Field, as you might have picked up from my talking about it, is a game that I love, a game that I used to enjoy playing with my friends and that they still remember fondly. Virtua Athlete 2K, or Athlete Kings as it should probably have been known, is a great game. If you missed that like me, you didn't give it a chance, if you can pick it up cheaply enough, I definitely say have a go, have a play round. If you've played any of those games and you want to leave a comment, it'd be appreciated. If you do like Sydney, feel free to speak up. I'm not going to block you, even though I should. And if you've noticed that I'm doing any of the events wrong and that you've got a better time, feel free to show me a screenshot, because as you might have picked up, I can be overly competitive.